If you ask people what they remember about the 2017 Logan, the thing they're most likely to mention is the dust. We don't have enough films devoted to starring and showcasing dust, but if that IMDb list were ever to be made, Logan would surely feature somewhere near the top, after Lawrence of Arabia and all of the Mad Max movies. After that, they'll probably mention the premise. Wolverine and Professor X are old, and they have to save a little girl who has the same powers as Logan. They'll probably remember Xavier's seizure at the casino and Wolverine's last stand, of course. And I think they'll probably remember how it ended, and the line.
This is what it feels like.
It is admittedly a very, very good line. Less likely to be remembered are things like Pierce, the man with the metal hand, Gabriella the nurse, Caliban, Xavier wearing this hat, this family, this scene. Xavier's baffling lion lecture, Logan getting talked down to by one child after another, Logan getting a goofy makeover in his sleep, Logan telling a child to stop hitting him, Xavier making this face. And it's really telling that so few of these things should stick because, well, if they did, I think people might feel a little differently about this movie. As it stands, Logan is one of the most beloved films in the entire superhero catalog, in large part because many saw it as a send-off to the character. Even if it would be more accurate to say that it was a send-off to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. There were always going to be more Wolverines, but it was nice of them to commemorate the man that started it all. But since the new Deadpool movie has put it back in the public conversation, I think it's finally time to acknowledge that Logan had some pretty notable faults. And I know it feels like I just kicked your puppy. But I'm not saying that you can't enjoy this movie or that it's even a bad movie. I'm just saying that maybe it isn't perfect. It's 2024, and we've let it have its time in the sun for the better part of a decade, and I think we are long overdue for an honest reappraisal of this iconic entry into the superhero genre. And all I'm asking is for you to give me a little bit of leeway as I try to explain my way through this. Now, if that is too big an ask, I get it. No hard feelings, but if you can stick with it, I'm going to show you why Logan, the greatest superhero movie of all time, was really a missed opportunity. What people were really responding to in Logan was the novelty of the setting and how the characters had been treated. And there are things about this that are genuinely interesting. The most iconic thing about Logan has always been the adamantium skeleton, and to see it set at odds with his other core trait, his healing factor, was an excellent inversion of the character that gave this treatment immediate depth. Xavier's descent into senility and the seizures that he's prone to are yet another brilliant play on the established traits of the character. What would it look like for these men to grow old? How would the inevitability of human frailty and decline manifest in this unusual group of extraordinary individuals? We laugh a little at the dark comedy of seeing Xavier, the embodiment of gentility and self-composure, saying fuck and shit. It's just so far outside of what we know about the character, and in such a relatable way that it can't help but to charm a little, even if it depresses us. But this is achieved by obliterating all of both men's past victories. The previous films were so full of spectacle, especially once we got into the reboot and Days of Future Past, that seeing these characters in such a small story immediately tells us that they have fallen off. Nobody wants to think about Batman dying of prostate cancer, but that is sort of what we get here. And of course, that's the point. After everything these men have been through, this is how it ends. And that's heavy and interesting and worth exploring, but the movie does actually very little with this, its most interesting dimension. Instead, it tries to recreate the same old conflict, humans versus mutants. And by doing this, after it has already unmade the triumphs of so many previous films which dealt with this same conflict, it makes it harder to invest in the stakes here. Why should I believe that killing Palpatine this time is going to matter if it didn't last time? This is the problem that you run into when you keep going back to the same creative trough. Eventually, you don't have anything to add that won't detract from previous stories that have already been told. Logan is contacted by the nurse and has Laura given over to him, and from that point on, it's more or less a straightforward escort mission that occasionally attempts to cop vibes from films like No Country for Old Men and Children of Men. It would have been so refreshing to see both men grappling with their losses, with their lives. There is such gravity between them, the noble Titan and the loyal foot soldier, both brought low by the ravages of time. But the film is such a massive miss because it doesn't recognize that this is what should have been explored. Instead, it just has to do what has since become common practice: shift focus from the familiar, usually male hero to their newer, younger, frequently female replacements. I'm not exactly sure why most people give this movie a pass for this, when the same people are usually highly critical of other films that did it. Xavier is an idiot in this movie. I get what they were trying to do. He's supposed to pave the way for Logan being able to accept this last mission, but more than anything, he just comes across as kind of delusional. Logan is the one that understands the score and knows what needs to be done, and Xavier is there basically to provide support for him to begin to believe in something that is hopeful to the point of absurdity. He, Xavier, literally admits that this place that they're trying to take Laura probably doesn't exist, but he's just like, well, she believes in it, so let's go.
Where are we going? Eden doesn't exist. You understand? It's not real.
It is for Laura.
Which, okay, it's not like you have many better options at this point, but honestly, there's not even an attempt to convince Logan or the viewer that this might be legit. If this were you, and you were in Logan's shoes, you would 100% believe that the nurse was just nutty, and you were driving to absolutely nothing. On top of that, he is an awful co-parent. The gentle parenting thing, the way he is constantly taking sides with Laura against Logan or undercuts Logan's authority is extraordinarily frustrating.
And no one's hitting this kid, just like, tell us your truth, tell us.
God help you if you have to raise a child with someone like this, and God damn you if you are this person. But worse than all of that is the fact that Xavier's stupid naivety gets this entire family killed. First, he convinces Logan to pull over to help them. Then he convinces Logan to join them for dinner. Then he convinces Logan to stay the night, ultimately culminating in Dr. Rice and X-24 tracking him to this location and killing the entire family and Xavier. It was so bad that I started getting flashbacks to the second season of Walking Dead. Shane, you were always right. You deserve so much better. Think about it. If Logan had never pulled over, what was the worst thing that was going to happen to this family? Some of their horses get killed? They would be 1,000% better off if they had never met our little trio. X-Men has always been intended as an allegory for race and sexual minorities, but mostly race. The connection between mutants is essentially a racial connection, or at least it's always been viewed as one. And this was actually the primary problem with Magneto. He is a racial supremacist and a separatist. The fact that he was written to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor was intended to communicate the deep truth that he who wrestles with monsters should watch himself lest he become a monster. And it's supposed to be a deep character flaw on Magneto's part that he doesn't care about anyone unless they are a mutant. In the third film, he abandons Mystique without a second thought the moment that she is hit with a dart that causes her to lose her mutant powers.
Hey. I'm sorry, my dear. You're not one of us anymore.
We rightly look at this as monstrous. Her loyalty to the cause, her sacrifices, her beliefs, all of these are completely meaningless to Magneto as soon as she's no longer part of his racial group. So it's ironic that Logan joins in a fight that has almost no connection with him except that he is part of that same racial group as the kids from the lab. Obviously, he would still be morally obligated to help them simply because they're kids and they're in danger, but the film clearly wants to conflate this obvious moral imperative with this pseudo-racial dimension.
There is a young mutant sitting in our car.
Yeah,
And where we're taking her, there are others. Does that mean nothing to you?
Yeah, it means nothing to me.
So it's worth pointing out how shallow this connection really is. They're mutants, he's a mutant. That's all it comes down to. Imagine if the allegory was dropped and this was really a story about a guy helping a bunch of kids because they're the same race as him. They don't have any shared history, they aren't part of a common culture, they don't have any common commitments or deep-seated values. To the extent that Logan is uniquely obligated because they're mutants, it's just the sci-fi equivalent of, hey, you and I have the same color skin, let's work together. It's just sad. Logan used to be part of a community and a family of people whose lives were bound together by their belief in a common dream. Sure, they all started from that shared mutant background, but that connection was eventually subordinated to the belief that humans and mutants could coexist, and that mutants were morally obligated to use their abilities to the benefit of humanity as a whole which they included themselves as a part of. Logan's character arc through this movie is supposed to involve his learning how to hope again, but there's no actual reason why he should. And by the end, everyone he knows and loves is dead. All their battles, all their victories, all their sacrifices have been overturned by Rice, whose subtle gene therapy has simply eliminated random mutation. This is one of, if not the most interesting aspect of the movie, and it's left completely unexplored. The animating principle of the X-Men, as opposed to the mutant ethno-nationalist types like Magneto, took for granted that mutants just existed. And since they existed, they were devoted to establishing peace between the larger mass of humanity and themselves. Magneto's war against the humans was predicated on the idea that humans would eventually resort to open genocide of mutants. After all, he'd seen it happen once before. But what if that genocide didn't involve a single shot fired, a single concentration camp, a single death? What if it was simply medicine? In many of the earliest stories within the Marvel Universe, the genesis of the extraordinary people that would star in these stories was heavily intertwined with the subject of nuclear radiation inspired by fears surrounding the A-bomb. The Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, all of them straightforwardly owed their existence to radiation. And the X-Men too attributed their existence to the influence of radiation. In X-Men number 1, Xavier implies that his unique abilities are the result of the fact that both of his parents worked on the atomic bomb, and this connection is further emphasized by the original tagline for the series describing the X-Men as the children of the atom. These origins have been largely forgotten over the decades, but they're worth remembering when Rice explains that all he had to do to eliminate mutants was essentially treat humans from the presumably radiation-based gene damage that was creating them in the first place. This takes the familiar conflict between humans and mutants and places it outside of the moral categories that have been used to define that conflict in previous stories, something which is incredibly interesting. For humanity, the decision to eliminate mutation is an absolute no-brainer. Mutants are, at best, an unchecked power in the world capable of doing incredible harm to humanity at any given time and restrained only by either their own morals or by the mutant police force, the X-Men. And they are, at worst, an existential threat with which there cannot be any middle ground. The only thing that would rightly restrain non-mutants from genociding mutants would be a commitment to human and civil rights, which was always the subtextual content of the comic storyline. But simply removing the causes of random mutation is clearly not a violation of anyone's human rights. It has obvious utilitarian benefits for humanity. If you could cure autism without harming a single autistic person, why would you not do it? Any answer to that is going to have to appeal to some principle over and above utilitarianism or human rights. And so, Logan and Xavier find themselves in a world in which the moral conflict that defined every aspect of their lives and their identities has simply been stepped over and relegated to the dustbin of history by a new technology, rendering their lives meaningless at the moment when they are least capable of grappling with that fact. And that is a profound subject worthy of investigation and the meditations of writers like Milan Kundera and Yukio Mishima. It is probably the most fascinating aspect of the movie, and it is almost entirely ignored. Instead, the movie sides with Magneto, who is always more interested in looking at mutants as a separate ethnic group with interests that cannot be reconciled with the rest of humanity. And the leader of the band of mutants that Laura and Logan joined up with is apparently a clone of Magneto, heir to his powers and, who knows, maybe even his mission. What then is the point of them getting away? Is it just to save his daughter Laura? But Laura is only a daughter in the most clinical sense. And comparison between her relationship with Logan and the relationship between normal parents and children emphasizes yet again the hollowness of these connections. Between normal fathers and their daughters, the connection is forged out of, hopefully, years of familiarity and duty, kindness, and nurturing. At the very least, a child ought to be the product of some love affair that you had or a choice that you made. Laura has none of this with Logan. Rather than the thick connections that real parents have with children, Laura's only connection with Logan is genetic. It would be more appropriate to call her his half-clone, if it's even half. Obviously, I repeat, you still help the kids because it's the right thing to do, but the idea that Laura or any of the rest of them represent an extension of Logan's beliefs or the things that he stood for in his life is just completely bogus. And I guess I'm just not done talking about what they did to Xavier. He'll also periodically just say shit that is beyond Here's one handy example that comes up during a discussion in which he is explaining that he thinks Laura can be better than Logan.
And by the way, Laura's foot claws are the obvious result of her gender, you know.
Is that a fact?
In A Pride of Lions, the female is both hunter and caregiver. She uses the front claws for hunting and the back claws defensively, thus ensuring their survival. I'm pretty much convinced that exposure to arguments like this is the reason that so many Americans simply cannot think.
That is one big pile of shit.
No part of this is logically coherent, but there are enough breadcrumbs that you can suss out what the writers were trying to do. Recall that this is 2017 and we are well into the girl boss, the futurist female movement, so we've got to find some way to pander to that cause célèbre. That's the basic motivation on the part of the writers. They also want to continue to establish the superiority of this new character to the aging male original, that she may or may not be here to replace, depending on market reaction. Well, we gave her foot claws, so let's see what we can do with that. Lions are a mainstay in feminist discourse because most people are, or at least were, unaware that lionesses do the bulk of the hunting and caregiving, while the male lions just seem to strut around looking pretty. Now, this is actually false. The male lions, their primary role is to protect the pride from other male lions, but forget about that for now and also just forever. This reinforces notions of gender that are flattering to the girl boss crowd, so let's see if we can work that in. So in comes this tenuous connection with the lions. Is there any rational justification for this connection? Of course not. Laura is not a lion. Logan is not a lion. Logan's hero name isn't Lion Guy, it's Wolverine. That is a different animal. Logan doesn't have any genetic connection to lions. He's from Canada, not the savannah. I don't even think they have lions in zoos in Canada. I don't even know if they have zoos. Wolverine's animalistic tendencies were always of a more general nature, but they were definitely more canine than feline. Sabretooth, Logan's counterpart and antagonist, was much more closely connected with big cats in both his visual design and his name. But let's leave all of that aside for a second. Male lions also have claws on their back feet. So the explanation just falls apart the exact moment that you hear it. And moments before this, he's scolding Logan for using profanity in front of Laura, before implying to Logan, the guy holding everything together right now, and for years in fact, that if Laura, despite being a killer who has gutted like 50 people at this point, not saying it wasn't justified, can be spared from having to hear too many naughty words, that she might be able to be better than Logan. The disrespect is unreal, and it's such a boomer way of thinking. Xavier goes back and forth between being the character that we remember and being just a jackass. But Xavier has been built up as something like a saint in these movies, and saints aren't supposed to turn into assholes because they're going through tough times. Seeing Xavier treat Logan, his caretaker, like this is a dark blemish on his character. He doesn't meet fate with any kind of grace. In the end, he's equal parts the mentor that we remember from the previous films and just some regular crotchety old man. Pretty much everything up to this point is more or less forgivable, but the thing that really sealed it for me is the way that Logan is absolutely robbed in the third act. During the final confrontation, he takes this medicine that functions like concentrated adrenaline, and this allows him to, for a moment, become the warrior that he once was. He's a force of nature just dishing out the hurt. But the only people he succeeds in slaying before it wears off are a bunch of random thugs. He kills Dr. Rice, the man responsible for basically eliminating random mutation in humans, but there's so little build-up to it. Rice introduces himself to Logan, and then proceeds to dump an enormous amount of exposition despite the fact that the film is 95% over. As he explains, Rice was the one who conceived of giving the population gene therapy through food products. Again, I can completely relate to you if you forgot all about this. And then, Logan just shoots him. Well, okay, let's go over why this isn't meaningful. A, it's not going to change anything. He isn't some lone genius working without support staff, and the work itself has already been performed. It won't be difficult to replace him, and B, he also doesn't have any connection with Logan. They just met each other. As far as Logan is concerned, this man is a stranger. There's no kind of rivalry here, no emotional stakes. The antagonists for which there are actually stakes are Pierce and X-24. Pierce has been stalking Logan the entire movie, but X-24 is the more interesting antagonist because of what he represents. Logan, if he had never escaped the Weapon X program, if his captors had succeeded in robbing him of his humanity. X-24 is inferior to Logan in this regard, but totally superior in terms of physical ability. Their conflict draws on themes of agency, frailty, and morality. Is it better to be the weaker man if you stand on the side of goodness, or is power all that matters? And does Logan get to beat either of them? Nope. Pierce gets killed by the wiffle ball crew, and Logan gets decisively beaten by his clone before getting rescued by Laura again. This prepubescent girl actually manages to hold her own for like 3 times as long as Logan in this fight, while the man himself is getting harpooned in the leg. Then Discount Magneto drops an APC on the clone, and he then manages to lift that APC. Why in the world would you write it like this? 2 minutes ago, he couldn't get out from under a door. Now he can bench press 12 tons? It's just so needlessly ridiculous. The clone gets out and then proceeds to absolutely manhandle Wolverine, dragging him across the ground as he screams in agony before impaling him on a tree and proceeding to stab him over and over until Laura blows his head off with the adamantium bullet that she stole from Logan. Here's the thing. This could have been done well. It wouldn't even be that hard to fix. Rather than having Logan take the green juice just to get to the fight, just get him back in the truck that he still has and use that to make it to the soldiers. He takes out a bunch of grunts, but clearly has a difficult time doing it. Maybe he even has to resort to using firearms, something we've never seen from Wolverine. This would further emphasize that he's no longer the fighter that he once was. So when we get to see him with that steroid boost, it lands with even more weight. By the time X-24 is let off his chain, Logan is almost completely spent, and he gets handily beaten. Laura goes in, but she's getting beaten just as badly, and it's at this moment that Logan takes the adrenaline. He rejoins the fight for a bit, and he and X-24 are going at it one-on-one, and Logan is actually holding his own. Instead of going mindless barbarian, he fights smarter. He uses his experience and even starts to get the upper hand. While this is happening, the kids corner Dr. Rice and kill him. This works better since they are deeply connected to him, and there are actually emotional stakes. He is their captor and their tormentor. Logan is now looking like he might actually beat the clone, but Pierce shoots him with the harpoon, giving the clone some time to recover and heal up, which he can do much faster than Logan. You could even visually emphasize how much of an advantage it is by having Logan look at his own wounds as X-24 returns to full HP. Pierce says something like, "You can't beat him. After all this trouble, you're gonna die like a dog out here. Bet you wish you'd taken my card now, don't you?" And Logan just picks up a gun and shoots him. Maybe he says something, maybe it works better if he doesn't. He is then about to re-engage the clone, but at this moment, Laura rejoins the fight, and they work together, coordinating their attacks the same way that Bucky and Steve did in the fight at the end of Civil War. But the drugs are wearing off, and eventually Logan realizes that they aren't going to win. His injuries have exceeded his ability to recover, and he only has moments left. Laura takes on X-24 by herself for a few perilous seconds as Logan loads the gun with the adamantium bullet that he still has. The clone knocks Laura away and then goes after Logan one last time, impaling him on the tree and roaring in his face, and Logan says nothing but he locks eyes with the clone, raises the gun to his head, and pulls the trigger. Now, is that great? Of course not, but I wrote it in 10 minutes and got paid nothing for it, and it's still better than what we actually got. Everything good about the original ending is still preserved. You still get to have that final iconic scene between Logan and Laura. You still get to have her call him daddy and have him say the thing.
This is what it feels like.
But this way, he goes out on a shield. He doesn't get rescued by an 8-year-old in his own movie.
And I am not taking you.
Just as an aside relating to the discourse around this movie, following the release of Deadpool and Wolverine. Some, maybe a lot of people, have claimed that the new Deadpool doesn't undermine the ending of Logan because it was a send-off to that particular version of the character featured in the previous movies. And since the Wolverine in this movie is a different one, the sanctity of that ending is still maintained. This is what we call wrong. This Wolverine is not the same one from the first 3 movies. How do I know this? It's pretty simple, because in the original storyline of the original trilogy, Xavier dies. He doesn't just die either. He gets the Palpatine treatment. So the fact that we are seeing him now indicates that we have to be witnessing a different timeline. Although no one can be blamed for forgetting this, since the X-Men series has always had what you might call a loose continuity. I guess it all makes sense if you squint. But regardless, this film only made sense as a send-off if it was meant for Jackman's tenure in the role. And so the idea that this send-off isn't undermined by Deadpool and Wolverine because this isn't the same look.
Larry, what the hell are you can't just... Oh, Larry!
Stupid. And do not come at me with any of that garbage about Xavier transferring his consciousness after being atomized, so it actually makes sense for him to be Logan. This is cope fiction, and you know it. In a movie that was already legendarily bad, that scene was a standout. I don't think Logan is a bad movie. It just isn't a great one. And this is unfortunate because it had elements of a great movie. There are deep themes and interesting character arcs that might have been explored, and the disappointing thing is that they just weren't. Instead, the creators made choices motivated by certain political and marketing goals, which ultimately led to a cheaper, less compelling end product. Whether these choices were the result of studio meddling or not is not for me to say. It's not bad, it's just not anywhere close to what it might have been. It's remembered fondly, yes, for its novelty and its originality, but also because it was one of the better movies in a deeply troubled franchise. And it was supposed to be a send-off for the universally beloved leading man of that franchise, Hugh Jackman. While it attempted to grapple with themes much more interesting than the usual comic book fare, I think we can now acknowledge that these efforts were far from perfect.